Of all the jiu-jitsu campaign tactics attributed to master sensei Karl Rove, the one that protege Steve Schmidt perfected for John McCain is to attack your opponent at your own weak points. Got a campaign staff stocked with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac lobbyists and operatives, including your campaign manager, Rick Davis? Then charge Barack Obama with links to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. While you're at it, tell all those lobbyists in Washington that their days of running Washington are over, I tell you. Except 7 of McCain's top advisors and reportedly 177 people working as aides, policy advisors, or fundraisers are former lobbyists. And now, of course, there's the latest boogeyman, ACORN, a national network of community groups, some of whose individual members are currently accused of voter registration fraud. They're stealing the election, and it's Obama's fault somehow.
This ACORN voter registration fraud, I mean, that deprives America of their most precious right. I'm very worried, and I'm worried about Senator Obama's connections with ACORN, and those should be fully explained as well.
Okay, forget that voter registration fraud is very different from actual voter fraud and voter suppression, which is what happened in Ohio and Florida when those states' elections happened to be run by Republicans. I'm just saying. Just for a moment, focus instead on this picture. This is a picture of Senator McCain in 2006 at a rally co-sponsored by, say it with me now, ACORN! John McCain was the keynote speaker at the ACORN event. I'm not kidding. Listen.
What makes America special is what's in this room tonight. That's what makes America special.
That's John McCain talking to the same group he and his campaign and the right are now accusing of trying to steal the election for Barack Obama. Why the change of heart? Well, the chief organizer of ACORN said in a press release, quote, "We are surprised at McCain's efforts to vilify an organization that until recently he saw as an ally." In contrast, Obama had this to say about his connection to the group.
First of all, my relationship to ACORN is pretty straightforward. It's probably 13 years ago, when I was still practicing law, I represented ACORN, and my partner in that representation was the U.S. Justice Department in having Illinois implement what was called the motor voter law to make sure that people could go to DMVs and driver's license facilities to get registers. It wasn't being implemented.
So John McCain is calling out Barack Obama for stuff that John McCain hasn't explained about himself. Who's rubber and who's glue again? How does that thing work? Joining us now is Newsweek columnist and NBC analyst Jonathan Alter. Jonathan, thanks for coming in.
Hi, Rachel.
So it seems to me like McCain's attacks on Barack Obama have really frequently been on topics, on subjects where he's got bigger political vulnerabilities, or at least the same size political vulnerabilities that Obama has. Is that on purpose or is it an accident?
Well, I guess you could say chutzpah is Yiddish for maverick or something. I think that they want to confuse voters, so they throw up a lot of chaff. The problem is they might confuse voters about McCain's own record with lobbyists or what he's done in the past with ACORN, but they're not advancing the ball by doing this. So it's really a very short-sighted political tactic. It's not a strategy. It's an example of where they're off base, because they're fighting everything out at a tactical level. Mm-hmm. And by the way, if they're assuming people's stupidity, which is behind this, if you try to accuse somebody else of something you're guilty of yourself, you're assuming that the public is dumb. If the public's that dumb, then they think ACORN is something that falls from a tree. They're not going to really get the point. Well, so all of it is just a lot of activity to no particular end.
But if you look at the way that ACORN has been blamed, not only for voter fraud, not even talking about voter registration fraud, but also the way that ACORN has even been implicated by the right as having caused the financial crisis in some way, they caricature the group in a way that makes a very blunt point, that is a racial point. That is, the implication is that Barack Obama becoming president would mean an American government invested in moving political assets and money and favors to black people at the expense of white people.
That is true, and that's why you saw Palin at the Republican convention use community organizer as a dirty word, almost as a code word for those poor people of color who are trying to get organized. But partly they're afraid of ACORN. ACORN has registered millions of Americans, and at a time when nobody else was really looking out for poor people in communities across the United States, ACORN was doing so. Did they have some bad apples in ACORN? Absolutely. They had people who, as Obama said today, in order to get the paycheck from ACORN, they would fill out the cards, just to get the work done in ways that were not accurate.
Which happens anytime you pay somebody to register people,
of course.
Right? Yeah.
And the important thing here, and I discussed this with the head of ACORN yesterday, is that it was ACORN that brought this to the attention of election officials. It's not like ACORN was caught out in doing this. ACORN doesn't want to have bad registration cards because then those people can't vote. So this whole thing it's just another one of these ridiculous tempests in a teapot, but I think you're quite right that there is a race and class subtext to this that's of a piece with a lot of the rest of their tactic on this.
Right, because the political salience of this depends on getting the blunt point that this is somehow black people, poor people, inner city people up to no good in a way that has something to do about the election. That's the blunt point that they're hoping, I think, comes across.
That won those people.
Yes,
kind of variations
that's exactly right. But in order to punch back against it, in order to explain what's wrong with that tactic, you have to understand the difference between voter fraud and voter registration fraud. The idea that if you do sign up Mickey Mouse to vote, Mickey Mouse won't then turn up to actually cast a ballot. So there's no incentive to steal the election with registration fraud.
But also there's a bigger thing going on here. Since 1964, when large numbers of African Americans were allowed to vote for the first time, the Republican Party in every election since then has been dedicated to trying to suppress turnout on the theory that the more turnout, the worse for Republicans. Democrats have tried to expand turnout, and as they've done that, of course, the Republicans have charged voter fraud. The Republicans have had the upper hand in this because of some important Supreme Court decisions, including one that requires that allows states to require you to have a driver's license or a non-driver's license equivalent in order to vote. And if that gets widespread, it'll be very hard for a lot of people like those we saw during Katrina who don't have driver's licenses it's almost like a latter-day literacy test or these things that were done during Jim Crow segregation to keep people from voting. So that's the real story, is the advances that conservatives have made in recent years in keeping people from voting. The cases of actual old-fashioned vote fraud where, somebody is trying to vote when they shouldn't be, very, very few of them. And when asked, it's like impossible for them to come up with very many examples of this happening at the polling places.
Which was one of the important subplots in the whole U.S. attorney scandal. U.S. attorneys, federal prosecutors being directed by Republican political operatives, in essence, to find voter fraud examples, not being able to find them, running up against political frustration. One last quick point, Jonathan. Federal appeals court has just ruled that Ohio's top elections official has to verify all new voter registrations. Do you have any sense of what that might mean in Ohio on November 4th?
Well, the important thing is that for Democrats is that the Secretary of State and the governor are now Democrats. In 2004, both were Republicans and dedicated in a very obvious way to trying to suppress the vote. These Democratic officials are dedicated to trying to allow as many people to vote as possible. So they have control of the machinery. As we found in Ohio in 2004 and in Florida in 2000, the party that controls the machinery of the election process has the upper hand. So if I were a Democratic candidate in Ohio, I wouldn't get too worried about this.
When I go to my happy place, my small d Democratic happy place, the process of voting is not a partisan thing. It hasn't been politicized, and elections officials are not partisan positions. But that's just fake and in my head.
In your world. Rachel's utopia.
That's right. You should visit sometime. Jonathan Alter from Newsweek magazine, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Rachel.